Hi, everybody. It is wonderful to see you all tonight. I want to first recognize we're the River Prairie Group and the DuPage Monarch Project. We're closely together, but I want you just to explain that the DuPage Monarch Project is a coalition of four groups. It's the Conservation Foundation in throughout the Chicago region, Wild Ones of Greater DuPage, the Forest Preserve District of DuPage, and the River Prairie Group of Sierra Club. And within all the work that the DMP, the DuPage Monarch Project, does, there are so many volunteers and individuals that do a lot of help to make it successful. We have a social media manager who's amazing, educators, program committee, outreach, and garden and habitat specialists that work together as a team to help us be communities that protect pollinators. So I do want to tell you, Lonnie Morris is our founder and our coordinator for the DuPage Monarch Project. And over the last couple of years, we've been zeroing in on trees and native bees. And we actually have a state representative here in DuPage County who shares our interest in native bees, and we have a bill in the 26th spring session. It's House Bill 4438 to recognize a specific bee as the Illinois state native bee. The bee that's being recognized is the black and gold bumblebee, and that's significant for something you're going to hear in just a moment. Now, I just want you to know, tonight, over 300 people signed up for this program. Of course, we don't have quite that many here, but it is amazing the interest in native bees. Our speaker tonight is Judy Cardin. Judy is a retired bureau director for the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. She lives up near Madison, Wisconsin, and since her retirement, Judy's launched a new chapter in her life with her husband as well, with a deep love and interest in bumblebees and gardening for wildlife.
Yeah.
As a member of the Wisconsin, listen to this, the Bumblebee Brigade. She brings decades of hands-on experience, a passion for supporting wildlife, and practical insights from her lifetime of gardening, both for beauty and for bees and pollinators. She shares this information at the UW Arboretum in Madison, on social media and giving programs like we're going to benefit from today. I asked, this is the fun, I love this story. Okay, I asked Judy how she became interested in native bees specifically, and she told me an incredible story. She was in the garden one day working, and amazingly, a bumblebee flew in front of her. And it flew right across her path. It was a big queen bumblebee, and it was a black and gold bumblebee. She stopped, and again it came back just about 18 inches from her face. Judy, at that point, became totally smitten, and she started to study habitat and welcome those amazing creatures to nourish them in her own yard. She told me she felt that it is important to do what she could to make the world a better place. And by encouraging others to plant native flowers in their own yard, she creates that hope for bumblebees and pollinators. This is something that she's going to tell us more about, and we can follow in her footsteps as well. So, without any more of me talking, let's listen to Judy and her wonderful program. Thank you for being here with us, Judy.
Thank you, Connie. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk to this group, and I'm so excited for spring. I hope everybody else has spring fever like I do. When Connie asked me, what got me interested in bees, what sparked me, um, I call that moment that I had when that huge black and gold queen was getting to know me and flying back and forth in front of my face. I call that meeting a bee, where I truly met and understood a bee. And it was just an epiphany for me that I've been a gardener all my life. I've been a nature lover all my life. I've seen bumblebees, thousands of times probably, but I had never made the connection to them as individual species, and as anything other than an insect that's buzzing around on flowers and has a stinger. So maybe I should think about that. When I met that bee, the epiphany I had was there's a whole world that I don't know about, and I am going to find out about it because this is just so fascinating. So I do a lot of things in finding out about it. I won't read all of these off, but I've just gone a lot of different directions. I educate on bumblebees themselves. I educate on pollinators. And probably most important, my yard is my classroom. And over the last 20 years, but much more intensively over the last 8 years, we have converted our yard to native habitat. And at this point, we have 350 native plant species in our little quarter-acre yard and over 25,000 native plants. And every single one of those plants supports biodiversity in our yard. Every single native plant has relationships with insects and birds and animals that are in an ecosystem, and they're really the building block for the rest of that ecosystem.
Judy, I need to interrupt. I want people, my wife is not seeing your slides at all, so I just wondering if
Okay.
other people
Is
are having
is
problems.
anybody else not, is anyone seeing the slides?
I can
I
see
see
them.
Oh,
them.
oh, she's got it now. So sorry
Okay.
about that.
All right.
Just making
Hey,
So
sure
we'll,
I
everybody's
had
having a good
one
experience.
other, as long as we're interrupting you, Judy, I apologize. We were asked, maybe let's not send a bunch of hearts and stuff up right now until like the end of the program. It's a little distracting, although I share your enthusiasm.
but send your hearts through your thoughts to me because
Yeah.
I love them. All right. All right. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. And just in a kernel, what we're going to talk about is why bumblebees need our help and how much we can do in our own yards to make a difference for them. So, what bees will be buzzing in your yard? The decisions you make about the habitat in your yard are really going to determine that. And what we're going to do tonight is talk about those possibilities. Here's all the possibilities right here. These are the the families of the over 400 species of native bees that inhabit the Midwest. And each one of these families has, as you can see, just from 86 species to 134 species. There's a lot of bees to meet here. 30% of them nest in stems or cavities. 70% of them go underground, usually digging holes. But in the case of bumblebees, who are social bees, they use an already created nest site, and it's more often than not an underground nest site. A bee that does not need our help is the honeybee. The honeybee has a beekeeper. It's an agricultural pollinator. There's clearly a use for it in agriculture, and they give us honey. But what I would just like to make sure everybody's aware of is that if you're trying to help bees and if you're trying to help your ecosystem, the bees that you really want to help are the native bees. They're the ones that are in trouble, and they're the ones that really will benefit from native plantings. The honeybees actually compete with native bees for floral resources big time. One honeybee hive, easily can have thousands of bees, which can very much overpower native bee resources in an area. And they also can spread diseases. The varroa mite is a mite that flourishes in the perennial honeybee hives, but cannot survive in the annual nests of native bees. So this varroa mite carries a lot of diseases. And the honeybee, when it uses the same flowers as a native bee, can spread those diseases to the native bees. So while they're cute as all heck, and we definitely need them for agriculture, my message is you won't be helping bees by starting a backyard urban hive. What you'll be doing is having the bees from your background hive go into your neighbor's yard and use the floral resources there. What does need our help are the native bees and in particular the rusty patch bumblebee, which is an federally endangered species that we have right here in the Midwest. These are the bumblebees of Illinois, and this is from Bee Spotter. And those little kind of maroon arrows that I have pointing there, the Aphanus is the rusty patch, the Fraternus is the Southern Plains bumblebee, and the Pennsylvanicus is the American bumblebee, and the Variabilis is a cuckoo bee. All of those are very threatened bees. The Variabilis has not actually been seen for many decades and is possibly extinct. The Aphanus, of course, is an endangered species, and both the Fraternus and the Pennsylvanicus are being reviewed for endangered species status from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. About a third of bumblebees face serious threat of extinction. This is what's happened to the rusty patch bumblebee since about the 90s. If you see all those little kind of grayish squares on this map that covers sort of the northeastern portion of the United States, that's the former range of the rusty patch bumblebee. It was a very common bee throughout most of that range. Where you see the red, that's where you are likely to have rusty patches are likely to inhabit those areas where you see the bright red. They've been observed there. So you can see that the concentration and sort of the last chance for the rusty patch bumblebee is right here from northern Illinois up through Minnesota. So what happened? Why are bees facing all of these threats? There's a kind of a combination of things that have happened. Very important is habitat loss. We've got agriculture, we've got business, we've got homes, we have all sorts of things that are now using the habitat that the bumblebees used to use. We have a lot of chemicals and pesticides that are being used, a lot agriculturally, but there's a lot being used on yards right now. I mentioned some of the diseases. Those have been very serious threats. And in fact, disease from a managed bee is something that a lot of experts think is what caused the most significant problem for the rusty patch bumblebee. And then finally, climate change and all of the many things that are changing because of that. A very conservative estimate is that overall insect population has declined by about 25% in the last 30 years. And that is a heck of a decline. But the good news is we truly can make a difference in our yard. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Each and every one of us, with every flower we plant, can make a difference. So what can we do? First of all, they need that habitat that's been lost. We can replace that in our urban yards. So we can shrink turf lawn. Instead of having the full turf lawn, you can take a corner, you can take half, you can take whatever works for you, and you can convert that over to native habitat and native flowers and avoid all pesticide use. A native habitat does not require pesticide use. It really does balance itself if we aren't getting involved in trying to raise plants that don't belong there. And by don't belong there, what I'm talking about is native plants have evolved relationships with insects and with the native animals in their ecosystem. So we have a whole huge group of plants that are larval host plants for moths and butterflies. Of course, one of the most well-known of those relationships is milkweeds and monarchs, but there are thousands of other relationships that exist between plants and caterpillars. Pollen host plants for pollen specialist bees. About a third of all those bee species that we just looked at, those over 400 bee species, about a third of those require specific pollen to feed their young. And then we also need diverse flowers for generalist pollinators. That's what a bumblebee is. A bumblebee will use a lot of different kinds of flowers. They don't have to have a specific pollen for their young. However, bumblebees have evolved and have relationships with different flowers. There are bumblebees with long tongues and there are bumblebees with short tongues. They use two different types of flowers, and they need flowers at the right time. This is from Doug Ptolemy's list of keystone species. We are certainly not going to go through all of these, but I want everybody to be aware of this resource. This is from the National Wildlife Federation, and what we're looking at is for eastern temperate forests. That's ecoregion 8. That's where we all live, is ecoregion 8. What Doug Ptolemy did is he researched and identified what trees and what flowers feed the most caterpillars and feed the most pollen specialist bees. And we're not going to go through all of these, but if you look at just the top, if you look over on the right-hand side where it says top 30 keystone plant genera for butterflies and moth caterpillars, those top three trees there are oaks, and then kind of the cherry family, which includes plums and cherries and willows. If that far column there next to it says number of caterpillar species that use this as a host plant, those are amazing numbers. Oaks host 436 different species of caterpillars, cherries over 340, and willows 289. So if you plant one of those trees in your yard, it is absolutely amazing what you can do. Not all of us have the room in our yard to plant an oak. Most of us probably have room to plant a plum tree or a willow tree, but we can also do a lot for larval host and for pollen specialists by planting that next column, which is the top 30 native host plants for pollen specialist bees. And again, you can look at what the genus is. And if you look on the far right column, it'll tell you how many bees use that genus of flower as their pollen specialist host. And the top three are sunflowers, goldenrods, and asters. And those, so, when you're thinking about what to do with your yard and what can have an impact, it would be really good to consider those three species of flowers. However, in addition to those pollen specialist flowers, there are the generalist bees that need flowers, and there are pollen specialist bees that are very specific to certain plants. So what I listed here, this is mostly spring flowers that we're looking at. These are bees that, in a lot of cases, there's only one bee species, for instance, that uses wild geranium. There's one bee species that is a pollen specialist bee for wild geranium. And wild geranium isn't, listed in those top groups of species. But think about if you've got a wooded area or shade on the north side of your house, you can plant some of these beautiful spring flowers and you can make a difference for these pollen specialist bees. I would encourage people, do a screenshot if you're interested in some of the specific species I'm going to show. Do a screenshot, and I also post a lot of this information on the Wisconsin Midwest Bumblebee Observers Facebook page. I'll bring that up in a little bit, and you'll get a chance to do a screenshot of that also. So almost all of this information is available on that Facebook page also. Here's some examples of those relationships I talked about that in this case, it's bumblebee queens. The Virginia bluebells on the left there is a spring ephemeral, and it is blooming right when those queens are coming out of hibernation and desperately need food because they have been hibernating for 6 to 9 months, and they also need pollen to provision their nest. So that's a case of a spring ephemeral that is blooming at the right time for those bumblebee queens to survive. On the right-hand side is one of my favorite bumblebee flower relationships, the shooting star. And what you see there is a queen bumblebee who is buzz pollinating the shooting star. And what she's doing is you can actually see her little jaws in that picture. She's grabbing on to the top of the anthers with her mandibles. And then she is vibrating her wings, and that's the buzz of buzz pollination. You hear a very audible buzzing sound when you are lucky enough to witness a bee doing this. And that vibration shakes the pollen out of that shooting star onto her abdomen. And bumblebees are one of only two bee species that can regularly buzz pollinate shooting stars. So a very close relationship that benefits both of them. And on the other end of the season, we have a wonderful relationship to just think of as an example of why we want native flowers for our bees. This is bottled gentian that blooms very late in fall. And again, a very important for queens, but this we'll look at the life cycle. These are the new queens on the other end of the season that are feeding up and getting ready to hibernate. And the bottled gentian can only be pollinated, can only be entered initially by a very large bee, like this big common eastern bumblebee that you see shoving her way in there. I've watched smaller bees try to enter before the door has been opened, and they can't get in. So diverse native species and natural habitat matter. So the big things that you can do are shrinking the turf grass, and you transition gradually. Just, pick one small area of your yard to start with if you haven't gotten going on your journey of converting. It took us 8 years to convert our front yard, and at this point it's 85% natives. But 8 years ago we took probably I don't know, maybe a 10 by 8 section of our front lawn and started with that. And we learned a lot. What happens is you learn your yard when you do that. You learn what your soil's like. You learn some of the shade and sun differences that you have in your yard. And you learn in different parts of your yard what flowers are going to work best. So that means you have a plan for intentional growth, but you should understand going in that plants do what plants do. They're going to grow very well when they're happy, and they're not going to grow at all when they're not. So if you've planted something and it isn't growing well, move it, plant it someplace else. If it's spreading way too happily, well, then you can make some decisions about how much you're going to let it spread. Always plant in drifts of at least 3 to 5 plants. A lot of people find that more aesthetically pleasing, so that's important. But that's also from a biodiversity perspective. That's how plants typically grow. They spread in those little clumps. And what bumblebees and a lot of other bees practice is floral fidelity. So even though they're not pollen specialist bees, a, a worker bee, bumblebee, only lives about a month, which is often about the bloom time of a flower. That individual worker bee will choose one species of native flower, and that is what it will gather pollen from and nectar from for its entire life. So that makes a lot of sense for the bee because she's not wasting time trying to figure out there's very complex pollination systems in a lot of flowers, and the bee has to learn that in order to do it efficiently. So she learns it once. She doesn't learn 20 flowers. She learns one flower and can be very quick and efficient in gathering her pollen. And of course, for flowers, well, that's how pollination happens. She goes from the same species of flower to another flower of the same species so that she can effectively pollinate. And then finally, if you want to plant a lot of species, and I want to plant a lot of native species because I understand now that every different species of native plant that I plant means I'm going to be feeding more bees and more caterpillars and more birds in my habitat, in my yard. Do multi-layered planting and plant densely. And so what I mean by that is plant things at very low level, and we're going to look at some of these things like short native grasses and sedges and pussy toes and wild strawberry. A lot of these short plants are well under a foot tall, and what they do is they form kind of a ground cover at ground level. That means you don't have to use any mulch at all. They form a green mulch under sort of the canopy of your taller flowers, and then plant different heights of flowers so that you're using your vertical space also, that I, in my yard, and everybody's got to make their own decisions about what they're happy with in height. But in my yard, I've kind of divided it up, and I have tall areas where I have very tall flowers growing. Some of those plants that are incredibly good bumblebee flowers, but are can be sometimes 6, 8, even 10 feet tall. Well, I have an area where I've kind of put those together, and they work with each other. That's how they grow normally, and they hold each other up, and they look beautiful. And then I have other areas where I have different heights of flowers. If you can, include small trees and shrubs because they make a tremendous impact on biodiversity. So this is our yard. And in May of 2020, the top picture, this is when we were just getting started on our front yard. Our backyard is a beautiful woodland yard. We had done a fair amount of planting back there already. But this is when we took on the turf grass in our front yard. And if you look at that top picture on the right-hand side next to the house, that is our first native planting. We started in 2019. And that's our baby yard, starting up there with the very first plants that we planted. The picture on the bottom, of course, is the same yard. We painted our house since then, I noticed. But what you can see, what we did is every year we took a different section of lawn. We were very original in that first section that you see in the picture on top. That is called Garden 1. And then right in front of it, when you look on the right hand of the picture on the bottom, where you see next to the sidewalk, that's Garden 2, etc. So we have gardens 1 through 10 at this point in our front yard that were all planted on slightly different schedules during that period. And if you want to do a screenshot of this, you can. Otherwise, this is available on that Facebook page. And if you aren't on Facebook and want to send me an email, I will be happy to send you this. If that's the best way for you to receive it. This is a set of instructions I put together for smothering turf grass for native plantings. It's a step-by-step guide that we're not going to go through right now. However, if you do this next month in your yard, you can be planting native plugs in May in your yard. And it's very effective. It's using, I'll show you a picture. In this shot, if you look at that top photo next to the sidewalk, you see that very thin cardboard. That's the last area that we smothered in our yard, and we did that in March of last year. And what that is that's builder's paper that we used instead of cardboard boxes. You can also flatten out cardboard boxes and use them for smothering. It's a lot easier. You could buy it at Home Depot. This particular one is called Ram Board. There's other brands of builder's paper, but just make sure that the builder's paper is this thin cardboard. It comes in a roll, and that it's not actually paper, because if it's paper thin, it's not going to be effective. You want to have that thin roll of cardboard. And then what we did is if you look down on the photo on the bottom, that's where we applied arborist chips, about 2 inches of arborist chips on top of that cardboard. So what happens is by May, you've done enough smothering of grass that you just cut a hole right in the cardboard. You don't roll the cardboard up and get rid of it. It will decompose on its own in your yard. It'll take about a year for that cardboard to completely decompose, and the arborist chips can take even longer than a year, which isn't the worst thing, because when you have a new planting like this, it also prevents weeds from starting up until the plants themselves can form their green mulch and become dense. So what we did, and I'm going to show you some of the examples here, is this is a green mulch kit. Now, this is from a sale that I'm the chair of up here in Wisconsin, so it's probably not going to be practical for a lot of you to buy these and come up to Madison to pick them up. You're welcome to if you want to. But I wanted to show you the plants themselves that are in these kits because these are very effective green mulch plants. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see what I have is a lot of sedges, common wood sedge, rosy sedge, palm sedge, longbeak sedge, Pennsylvania sedge, and then also some shorter grasses that work very well in yards. And then on the right-hand side is my short and sweet borders garden kit. These are flowering plants that also work as green mulch. They're all very short. They're all basically under a foot tall, and they all work really well growing among taller plants or where you see that cardboard there next to the sidewalk, if you want to keep things short next to the sidewalk and not have anything impeding your sidewalk, these are great plants that you can use to plant in that kind of close to the sidewalk area, both the green mulch kit and the short and sweet. So some of the flowers in there, prairie pussy toes are just wonderful flowers. They're the host plant for the American lady butterfly. And we planted a lot of these last year. We had so many American lady butterfly caterpillars that my husband named every single one of them and took videos of them. And being original as we are, every single one was named Chompy, but there was Chompy 1, Chompy 2, Chompy 3. But it's just so much fun. Again, not only do you meet the bees when you have native habitat, you meet all these wonderful caterpillars and butterflies and the biodiversity in our yard right now since we did this is amazing. On a warm, sunny summer day, I literally see thousands of pollinators when I go out in the afternoon. My yard is humming with them and fluttering with them, and it makes my heart feel so good. You know, when we have some of the kind of difficult things that go on in the world and go on in our country, and sometimes you start to feel hopeless about things like climate change or just political climate. Your yard can not only be a haven for pollinators, it can be a haven for you, where you can absolutely make a difference. You can have that satisfaction of making a difference, and you can just kind of fill a place in your soul with the work that you're doing and the good that you're doing. And the fact that I'm going to leave the world a better place for my grandchildren and my children, and you can do the same thing. I'm not only helping bees, I really am helping the world, and everybody can be a part of that. So here are some more of the kits that kind of reflect some of the flowers that we planted in our yard. We planted our entire street terrace with shorter flowers, and you can see that up in the short and sunny street terrace garden kit. There are so many beautiful flowers that are blooming in that about 2 foot high range that work very well on a street terrace. We have a requirement in my city that plants in a terrace cannot exceed 30 inches in height. Different cities are going to have different ordinances. You might belong to a homeowners association that has requirements, but these are some really nice shorter flowers that look absolutely beautiful, and every one of them is going to help be a larval host for caterpillars and also help both pollinator specialists and generalist bumblebee foragers. Down in the corner, the very important asters and goldenrods garden kit. And that, if you remember when we looked at what were the 3 keystone flowers that you could plant that would help the most caterpillars and would help the most pollen specialist bees, 2 of those 3 genuses that helped the most were asters and goldenrods. So this fall glory kit are keystone species that are just an incredible benefit to those pollen specialist bees and to the caterpillars. But they are also the flowers that when bumblebees are feeding to try to survive hibernation, these are the flowers that they some of the flowers they really depend upon. I'm going to move a little quicker because I, as usual, going to run out of time. Here's some other just really good kits if you want to do screenshots of this. If you're looking for shade plants, the Shade Pollinator Garden Kit is great, as is the Sunny. Down in the corner there, that's the Endangered Rusty Patch Bumblebee Kit. We have observed rusty patch bumblebees on every one of the flowers that is in that list. And if you are living in an area where you have some red in your zone and a chance of having rusty patch bumblebees supported in your yard, I highly recommend that you plant some of those flowers. And again, these are available on the Facebook page if you don't have a chance to do a screenshot. So let's take a quick look at the native solitary bees. These are the non-bumblebee bees. 30% of them are living in tube cavities. Very often that means a stem of a plant, pithy hollow stems. They are looking for stem diameters of 1/8 to 5/16 of an inch. The bee that you see in that on that sneezeweed is a leafcutter bee, which is just an absolutely adorable bee. And if you have rose plants or redbud trees or wild strawberries, those are some of the soft leaves that they like. They cut little circles out of the sides of those leaves, and then they use that to line their stem nest. So if you look at some of your roses and you see those little circles, don't say, "Oh my goodness, what's eating my flowers?" Say, "Hallelujah, I have a leafcutter bee that I can meet in my yard." Here's just some little cute little faces looking up out of their stem nests. This is a list of some of the plants that have been observed being used by stem nesting bees. This is by no means all inclusive. It just gives you an idea that what we do is we treat all native plants as possible stem nesting plants. This is the really important slide here. And this is what do you do for spring and fall cleanup in your yard if you want to support that 1/3 of native bees that are using the stems of the plants that you grew in your yard for their nesting? Well, this is what you do is year one. So the plants that you're growing this year, leave the flower stalks up and leave the seed heads up. You will have so many birds using those seeds in your yard. We just have flocks in our yard during winter. So then what we do is those plants that grew this year in spring, in March of the following year, I'm going to cut those back to 8 to 24 inches, so roughly 1 to 2 feet, because they are going to start using those stems in the spring. That when you cut them off, that's when they start their nesting. So I just throw the part that I cut off right into my garden area because it's going to decompose. That is going to help create rich humus soil in your yard. And the best thing that you can do for soil health in your yard is to leave the leaves and leave the vegetation, and you will end up with very fertile soil without any fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers harm your soil. Leaving things to decompose naturally is going to really increase the health of your soil. So what happens then is throughout the summer, these native bees kind of come in waves. Some start very, very early in the spring. Some don't start nesting until summer. They're going to use those stems throughout the summer. But this is really important, is that in the fall, you can't then cut off those, pull out those stems and toss them away or throw them on the ground, because those nests that those female bees created in the stems over spring and summer, that is where their young are hibernating. So you need to leave those standing, or you will negate all the work of those poor mama bees that have been building their nests in your yard all summer, and their young will die if you end up disposing of the stems. So what I do is I just leave the stems permanently, because what will happen is by the next year, when they've gone, well into year 2, they just decompose on their own. Ground nesting bees, I think, are a lot easier. Just make sure you're leaving some open ground. Turf grass is the enemy of ground nesting bees. Turf grass does not have available bare soil. So you can do one of two things. What we did is right now we only have grass aisles left in our native habitat in our front yard, and we just roughed that grass up. We we just scalped it low, roughed it up, aerated it, and put a bunch of native seeds in it. So there's still turf grass, but it's patchy. There's a lot of native plants coming up in it, and we have many native bees nesting in our yard right now. But if you have a mat of turf grass, it's going to be very difficult for a bee to build their nest. Same thing here. They're building their nest in spring and summer. The young are going to hibernate in that same nest over winter. So be careful. If you see little holes, we mark them, and we don't dig there because we know that there are going to be young emerging in spring from those holes unless we dig them up. Bumblebees are ground nesting. This gives you a look at their annual cycle. That great big green arrow at the top there is pointing to a hibernating new queen. This is what's happening with bees right now. They are hibernating. They might be hibernating in your yard. I know they're hibernating in my yard because I see them come out. They like leafy areas. They like native habitat areas for the most part for them to nest in. They dig a little, for the most part, they're digging a little shallow chamber for their hibernation chamber. So in very early spring, early April through May is typically when they emerge. That queen on her own is going to start a nest. And by about mid-May to early June is when the first adult workers are going to be produced by that nest. They'll take over foraging then, and the queen will stay in the nest and she will take care of the young. Then this nest, the goal is to raise those new queens that are going to carry on the next generation the following year. And towards the end of summer, they're going to produce males first, who then disperse. And then they're going to produce the new queens. And after they mate, they go into hibernation. So it's an annual cycle. Nests only last 1 year. So what do they need? They need native habitat. Be sure to plant native grasses and sedges along with native flowers. Some bees use native grasses as their base for their nest. The rusty patch bumblebee, the most common nest site, is an abandoned chipmunk nest. And so it's just leaving your garden areas natural. Don't tidy and clean them. Don't use pesticides. Let them be natural, and the biodiversity and the bumblebees will flourish. This is a queen, a new queen that is digging her hibernation chamber. I thought these were just wonderful shots where you can actually see her digging her hole. And what she'll do is she'll dig in. She's only going in a couple of inches. If you see holes like this, about a half to 3/4 inches in diameter, you may have a bumblebee hibernating in your yard. So again, I mark them. Be careful and don't dig there. If you do happen to dig up a hibernating bee, just cover her up with the same material. Here are some nests. The nest on the right is a rusty patch bumblebee nest that I was privileged to observe, and it's in an old chipmunk hole. What you see there are a couple of those new queens that were going through their basic training, learning to walk and fly and climb on sticks and just learning how to be a bee because they just went through complete metamorphosis from a larva into this adult form. So they have a lot of learning to do. And bees are really intelligent. I mean, they're incredibly intelligent. Over on the right-hand side are some more beautiful guyns is the term for those new queens that are going to hibernate over winter. And those are all northern amber bumblebees there. I want to just take a second to talk about this nest on the right-hand side. We just had a great opportunity to observe a bumblebee nest this past summer because somebody went into her shed and found a red-belted bumblebee nest on the log pile in her shed. And it was an open nest, which is extremely rare. Usually they're underground or, in some sort of cavity. But in this case, being in the shed was enough protection for that queen to select it. And we got to watch what we're looking at here are called nurse workers. These are the bees that are taking care of the babies. That's their job. There's other bees that are foragers that are going out and collecting the pollen. When we were taking these photos, I'm not going to advise anybody to get as close to a nest as we did because, a bumblebee will protect its nest if it feels threatened. But they knew we weren't threatening it. And we took photos within a foot of this nest so many times, and they didn't mind. They just went about their business because all they want to do is safely raise their babies. You really can coexist with bumblebees in your flowers. There's just absolutely no issues. But some people get concerned if they end up with a bumblebee nest in their yard or by their deck or sometimes even by their front door. And so many people that have come on the Facebook page saying, what do I do? I've got a bumblebee nest right next to my deck. Um, I talk them through it. And at the end of the summer, when they've realized that they had just this wonderful opportunity to watch their neighbors here raising their young, they just report back and say it was a great experience. Don't vibrate the nest so that they get afraid. Don't, do things that, might create fear in them. But if all you're doing is living your life next to them, they're fine. These bees didn't mind us being right next to them at all. This is a diagram from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, just giving you an idea of how far pollinators will go to forage. And if you see the second line down from the top, the second circle, that's the rusty patch bumblebee. And the estimation is about 900 to 1,800 feet. These are very rough numbers. They're going to go as far as they need to find food. But that kind of range is going to be more ideal for a successful nest. Nests can produce 0 gynes, those new queens, and nests can produce 60. The rusty patch bumblebee nest I showed you the photo of had at least 60 gynes. And it was in a person's yard, and it was surrounded by native flowers and native habitat. It was ideal habitat for the rusty patch bumblebee, and it was incredibly successful. Each of us, with every flower we plant, can absolutely make a difference. So early June, from April to early May, have those early spring flowers in your yard. We're going to take a quick look at that and leave habitat that's good nest habitat for them. If you want to do a screenshot of this, or again, they're available on the Facebook page. These are some great woodland flowers and sunny flowers that you can plant that are going to bloom in April to May, that bumblebees will use these flowers, bumblebee queens. And where you see the asterisk, we have watched rusty patch bumblebee queens using those flowers. So if you have an interest in helping the rusty patch bumblebee, this is an excellent list to try to select some of these to plant in your yard. During the summer, that's when the population peaks. And you're going to want to have a lot of flowers in the summer because that's when there's a lot of workers out that are trying to collect the pollen that they're going to use to feed those new gynes that are going to be the mothers of the next generation. Here are some great bumblebee flowers that you can plant for that June to August peak population time, both woodland and sunny flowers. And again, the asterisk indicates we have watched rusty patch bumblebees using those flowers. Now we get into the fall. This is when those gynes really need to be able to feed. Large gynes survive hibernation far better than a smaller gyne does. How much they're able to forage and eat matters to their survival over winter hibernation. And then they need those natural leafy areas to dig their hibernation chambers. And here are some of those flowers that are great for bumblebee guides and bumblebee workers that are still out at that point, both shady and sunflowers. And again, the asterisk indicates we have seen rusty patch bumblebee guides using those flowers. Every guide that can't find blooming flowers in a hibernation site, and every spring queen that can't find a nest site and early flowers means the loss of that bumblebee line. We lost a generation of bees if we lost that queen, because she represents that entire colony. So community science, there's a couple of programs you can get involved in. The reason I put this sign up, this is a sign that that I designed that we're selling as part of the Friends of the Arboretum Native Plant Sale. But that little QR code in the corner takes people to the Wisconsin Community Science Program for Bumblebees, which is the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade. But the point I wanted to make with this sign is, if you have a native area in your yard, and if you're a little worried about whether neighbors are going to understand or wonder why your yard doesn't look like their yard, if you put a sign like this out, it will help them understand and maybe even give them incentive to do the same thing in their own yard, because it's showing that what you do matters. And if you aren't in a rusty patch area, if you just want to put a pollinator garden sign up, that's great. And you can get these. Wild Ones has some great signs. Xerces Society has some great signs. It's a really good idea to let your neighbors know what it is you're trying to do. This is one of the Bumblebee programs that you can submit observations to, Bumblebee Watch. And then there's also Bee Spotter in Illinois. This helps scientists and governments gather information about populations to make decisions about whether they need to take action. Here is the Facebook page, the Wisconsin Midwest Bumblebee Observers. We gain a lot of people every single week here, because people that care about bumblebees and native bees, pollinators overall, and native habitat. It's a wonderful community. It is a safe community. Nobody gets to be mean in the community, because I do a little queen bee action if somebody gets mean on the page. We're not going to have time for a lot of bumblebee ID, which I figured we wouldn't. But I'm going to, the three bees that you are most likely to see in your yard are those species right there: common eastern, two-spotted, and brown-belted. And there's a QR code here, I highly recommend that you use that QR code. You can also access these on the Wisconsin DNR Bumblebee Brigade site. There's a web address there that you can use. This is a key ID traits for bumblebees handout that I put together that gives you the key one or two features that you could look at to identify a bumblebee. And I'll give you an example of that, which is this lady right here. How do you know you're looking at a rusty patch bumblebee? There is one key feature that's going to tell you, and the blue arrow is pointing at it there. You're looking for a rusty orange patch with a yellow skirt. So make sure you find that yellow skirt. And then you have an endangered rusty patch bumblebee in your yard if you find that. This is the queen. The queen rusty patch does not have that orange patch, just to make things a little difficult for you. All right, thanks. I think I left all of 3 minutes, but I think we are going to go a little over if people have questions. I think I'm correct, right, Connie?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I wrote down some questions from people, and first of all, yay, thank you. I will ask your questions in the order that I saw them in the chat. And then once we get through the ones that were written in the chat, if you want to raise your hand, I'll recognize you, and we'll go for about 15, 20 minutes or so. And there was a lot of really good comments and questions. So let me tell you a couple. You had a sign in your yard. Someone asked, what was that sign early in the questions? Was that the one of the signs from your bee brigade?
Yes. So I think the sign that no, it's not cooperating here. So the sign that I showed was a Rusty Patch Bumblebee garden sign. If you buy the Rusty Patch kit that I had showed you that has those flowers that the Rusty Patch Bumblebee uses, if you buy that kit, that sign comes free with the kit. And I have it in my front yard, and it lists what you need to do to support pollinators. It lists that having the native flowers blooming from April through October. It lists not using pesticides and having native habitat. That those are the three main things that we can all do in our yard to support pollinators and specifically to support the rusty patch. If someone wants to buy that sign, the only place other than getting it through the Friends of the Arboretum kit is it is for sale in the bookstore of the UW-Madison Arboretum. So it's sort of a Wisconsin thing. But if you come to Madison, come and visit my yard too. So there's a bonus if you decide that you want to stop in Madison. But otherwise, there are, as I mentioned, Wild Ones and Xerces has some wonderful pollinator garden signs that you can use also.
Thank you. And then, there was a question about specifically creating an area for ground nesting bees. Um, I mean, as you went along, you said leave a little spot that's bare. Do you actually make a little hole or anything like that, or just let them
So
do their thing?
they dig their own holes, and
Mm-hmm.
there are 70% of native bees are ground nesters. So you have a lot of different habitats that they will build in. Some of them prefer a sunny, sandy, bare area. Some of them prefer a woodsy, humus soil bare area. Some of them like to build, like they like to have some decomposing wood, around where they're digging their hole. So it really is finding different areas in what I call the microclimates in your yard, the different moisture areas, the different sun areas, and just making sure you've got some bare ground. So in your native plant area, you don't need to leave a huge pass. I've had them nest in, I had a little this was adorable. I had a little bumblebee like foot pad, that you could walk on, that was made out of plaster. And one of them went underneath there and dug a hole and built a nest. So it's just somewhere where they can get at dirt. So you don't, if you have a whole lot of mulch, they cannot, it's very difficult for them to build there. So I would say don't put mulch, use green mulch. And if you use green mulch, there will be bare areas in your native planting area for ground nesting bees.
Okay. And then, so do you have any trouble with deer? Deer and bunnies, how do you deal with either of those two lovely
With deer and
members?
bunnies, did you say?
Yeah, yeah, deer and bunnies.
All right. So there are plants that you can plant that are a little more resistant. And whenever I tell people that, they say, not in my yard. So, um, so what we do, first of all, if you have a really good native habitat in your yard, you can have neighborhood foxes like we do. And we went from losing a lot of plants to bunnies to we don't lose any plants to bunnies right now because we have a balanced ecosystem with the fox family who takes care of bunnies. But what we did, one of the things we did is when we had freshly planted, you can either put cages around them. You can make those yourself out of various types of wire fencing. You can buy them pre-made, like circles that you can put around. And you can also, one of the things that we do, because squirrels will also dig up freshly planted plants. There's this very small, it looks like an upside down wire garbage can that are
Hmm.
pretty inexpensive that you can buy to put over them. Otherwise, if you go onto a site like either Prairie Moon or Prairie Nursery, they will list what they view to be the more bunny resistant and deer resistant plants. So there are some plants like some mint family plants and some others that are not as attractive to bunnies and to deer. So if you've got a real problem with it, I would probably do both. What we did when we had a really bad bunny problem, in those photos that I had of my yard, you could see I had about a 3-foot decorative fence going around my planting area. And what I did is inside of that decorative fence, which isn't particularly protective of allowing bunnies in, there is a rabbit fence inside that's 2.5 feet high, and it has very narrow gauge wire at the bottom that even a bunny baby can't get through. And before we had our Fax family moved in, we put that around the large planting area because it gets to be a bit much to put a cage over every single plant. And that effectively kept bunnies out. We were not having bunny problems once we did that double fencing. It's called rabbit fencing, that, the fence that we put in that was about 2.5 feet high and had the narrow gauge at the bottom. Um, Deer are, you're not going to stop deer with a 3-foot fence, obviously. And probably with deer, it is trying to look and see um, what are they least likely to eat. And that's about all I can say there. It's difficult if you have a lot of deer.
Um, Boy, we got questions. About at least three more, just to let you know where we're at. One, do you distinguish bees from wasps in the underground nests, yellow jackets and stuff? Do you have any comments about that?
Yes. So
Hmm.
what we do is we are just as concerned about saving native yellow jackets as we are any other bee. They're a valuable pollinator. They are a very valuable part of the ecosystem. And what we have learned is they're the same as a bumblebee, except they're a little more aggressive in protecting their nest. But the key is to not threaten their nest. And we've had a couple of neighbors now that had the underground nests are typically the native yellow jackets, and the above ground nests where they build nests in the rafters of your garage or for maybe even your attic or up above your porch. Those are usually the non-native yellow jackets. So I would get rid of the non-native yellow jackets. They hurt the ecosystem, and they don't belong here. The natives, what we do is just put a little 2-foot garden fence around it so that animals and kids don't go running over it and people don't mow it. And we've had 2 neighbors that we had a very large yellow jacket nest in both of their yards that we put that fence around that had zero problems with stinging. So believe it or not, you can coexist with yellow jackets. If you mow next to them, you'll probably get stung because that vibration is a threat.
Yeah. Okay, I have two more questions and a comment, and then we're going to open it up if anybody else has things. One is, do you put out extra water for your bees, or do they get enough from the morning dew?
Bees really get enough for the most part. They get enough from nectar. We do put out water. What I do is I have a couple of bird baths and I put river rock in it. It's beautiful. And it gives insects something to stand on instead of drowning when they're using the water. And there are other insects that use that water, and boy, do the birds use it. They love it. Wasps will drink at it. And again, if it's a native wasp, I'm good with having them in my yard. But bees really don't normally need an extra water source unless there's a real drought.
Okay, one question and then a comment. So some people don't have Facebook, and you were so kind to put up your Facebook thing. Is there a website associated with UW or with
Yes.
the Arboretum that you could share for people
So
who don't have Facebook?
there is a Friends of the Arboretum page that all of those kits that I was showing you that'll give you all the lists of the plants and what the requirements are
Mm-hmm.
is at FOA um, Madison.org. I'm going to
All
make
right.
sure I've got that
And
right.
we'll try to put that when we send out the recording.
Yeah.
I'm going to write it down.
And I am also, you can put my email address in there if they want to have me email them one of the documents that we looked at. I would be happy to do that. And I can, you've got my email address. Feel free to include that.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope this is okay with everybody. There was some questions about seeing a local yard in the summertime. Joe, can you take yourself off mute and do you want to tell anybody about anything? Oh, he put it in the chat. Joe, do you want to take yourself off
Hi,
mute and
hi,
talk?
Connie. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, we're having our Saving Monarchs garden party. It's July 18th from 2 to 7 p.m. We're going to have a lot of wonderful organizations there. I posted it yesterday, and there's been 7 confirmations of organizations that will be there. I'm still waiting on Sierra Club, though, and DuPage Monarch Project to let me know.
We're coordinating. All right, don't be yelling at me on this. We'll be
But
there.
no, I'm just joking. But yeah, I
Yeah.
put it in the chat, our address. So if anybody could come, we'd appreciate it. It's always a fun time. We raffle off some garden signs and we have some food out there for everybody. We got rain gardens, monarch enclosure where we raise monarchs. So a lot of habitat out there to see.
Yeah, it's an amazing yard. Okay, thanks, Joe. We have a few minutes. Did anybody want to ask something? Would you like raise your hand in the chat or raise your hand if you know how to do that or unmute yourself and you can make a comment quickly? Judy, just so you know, the accolades have been flying through the chat. Everyone has
Aw,
just
that's so
just
nice. Thank you so
foaming at the
much.
mouth with joy at all the information you've shared. Thank you. Minnesota has a Lawns to Lake Eames garden.
I had a question for
Okay,
Judy.
thanks, Bob. Go ahead.
Well, yes, and I'm not from the area, so I'm not from where you guys are out in the Midwest, but I'm from Eastern Pennsylvania in Wayne, Pennsylvania. I was wondering if any of this. I'm sorry, I'll have to go on mute.
Okay.
Darn it.
We don't hear the background noise, but that's
If
okay.
if the question was about habitat in bees in some of the more eastern areas, there's actually a lot of similarity in bees and a lot of similarity in habitat. You do need to check. A lot of the flowers that I have on there are also native to Pennsylvania, but you do need to check, nativity because there's going to be some differences. But I think you'll find that quite a few of them are in fact native in Pennsylvania, if that was your question.
Okay.
That was it. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, we had over 120 people coming and going here tonight, and that speaks loud and clear for people being so interested in this topic. And your joy is spreading to us, and we can spread this out further to others. So I hope that you take that to heart
Good.
and put your signs in your yards and help your neighbors understand what's going on.
I do. And it is just the best feeling to be able to go out on your front porch and say, I did this. I made a difference. And everybody can do it.
Okay. Well, we'll